Welcome friends to another r/malicious compliance video. Just a quick reminder that I'm giving away a $20 Amazon gift card, so if you're interested in winning, all you have to do is leave as many comments as you'd like on any video I upload this week, Monday to Sunday on both Storytime and my second channel Storytime. At the end of the week, I select one random commenter, so best of luck and I'm looking forward to all your guys' comments. That said, our first story of the day is by Quen Hera. Are you sure you don't want training before I leave? Backstory, I was at my previous place of employment for 3 years. It was a new company, and when I started, there were no systems in place. There had been several incidents prior to me starting because of the lack of systems. By incidents, I mean things that could have shut the company down. So when I started, I set up systems, implemented policies, and over the first few months, had to replace almost the entire staff who would not let go of awful habits. 0 further incidents. Slowly, I built up a solid team. We often got praise from our customers about individual team members, and I even built up solid relationships with our competitors and others in related fields, and we helped each other out, sending clients to each other when we couldn't accommodate them, etc. When I had started, I came in at a lower salary but extra PTO to balance it out, 5 weeks. The agreement was when we hit a certain customer base, I would be given a raise. Within 6 months, we had doubled our customer base, and within a year, we had almost tripled it, and I got my raise. Around this time, the CEO makes a terrible investment that I warned him against, and we start to drain money. So there's the starting of resentment towards my salary. About 6 months later, he wants the company to get certified. It's a lot of work which I won't do for free. He also wants me to take over HR. Needs to meet standards for certification. I tell him I want compensation for taking over 2 additional jobs. He says he'll do it himself, procrastinates for 2 months, takes one look at what needs to be done, and then tells me he'll pay me. So I get it done, we get certified. But he doesn't want to keep paying me. We're talking about less than $100 a week. So he says he'll take over. Okay. On to 6 months later and the pandemic. CEO tried to get me start going into the office a month into the pandemic. Mind you, I had made our systems fully online from when I had started. He just didn't like not seeing my face every day. And I was of course hesitant. But with certain conditions, I go in. That same week, I get a call. There was a customer who came in with symptoms and had tested positive. So back to working from home. Well, this resentment over my salary and work from home started to get worse over the year. Rudeness, micromanagement, undercutting me in front of my staff, etc. Finally, CEO informs me they're cutting my PTO. I've had enough and turn in my month notice. I offer to train the CEO and everything, but he wants to meet face to face. Most of what needed training was on the computer, all the documents, customer tracking, etc. CEO procrastinates, so I finally just start sending documents I thought were relevant, and he asks to meet with me on the last day. I set aside a few hours because he had no idea how to do the recertification, no idea how any of the systems worked, etc. Instead of training, he decides to go over the printed out files and writes down a list of inspections. Takes me a total of 20 minutes. Okay, if you don't want to be trained, I can't make you. I double check with him to make sure he has all the documents. 5 p.m. on my last day, I delete everything off my computer. I had signed a termination document indicating I wouldn't be keeping confidential documents. A week later, I get a panicked call. There's data they need and can't find. Oh, sorry. Per the termination document you had me sign, I deleted everything. 2 weeks later, I get another call. Oh, you want to know how to do that? Oh, well, I used to use my system to do it, but that's all gone now. You had me sign a termination document stating I would delete everything, and since you couldn't be bothered to train on it. A few days later, another call. Oh, you're working on recertification? Sorry, I don't recall exactly how to do it, but it was in those documents somewhere. Too bad we didn't sit down while I was still your employee so you could be trained on it. It's been 3 months. 75% of the staff is gone. I received calls from them over the past months as they left. CEO's star employee, mine too, he did amazing work, contacted me for a reference. He's at a new position. Their primary customer, provided about 70% of business, is no longer sending them new business. Apparently, they're not very happy with them. Said customer had reached out to me a few weeks ago to find out if I was accepting business. Would you say you're the kind of person that when you witness somebody else procrastinating, it really irks you? Like really bothers you? Or are you the kind of person that doesn't let it bother you that much? If that person wants to procrastinate, they can flounder and fail all they want. Let me know in the comments down below. Our next story is by Elite Simpson. Want me to follow company guidelines? You might lose more than you thought. So I work for a railway company as a train manager, and during the checking of tickets, we get a little gray zone, as we call it, to bend the rules a little bit as we see fit. Mostly to avoid aggression and to make sure we can live with ourselves afterwards. While checking two guys, they both had a ticket with reduction, but only one had a valid card that granted said reduction. In this case, it was for low-income families. They have 50% off on public transport here. Those cards are strictly personal and have to be renewed yearly. When I asked where the second guy's reduction card was, he said he forgot it at home. It's clearly stated on the ticket and the card that the ticket is only valid with the card. Now, because he used his friend's card to get his ticket, I should immediately give him a fine. But because I'm not a very strict person and feel a little sorry for people with low income, I decide to disregard the wrongfully bought ticket and treat him as if he had no ticket, meaning I get to sell him one at a slightly higher cost because they should have had one before getting on board. Now, the guy that forgot his ticket was thankful because a fine would be more than 5 times the amount of the new ticket. However, his friend decided he didn't want to play by the rules and started insisting he'd get the fine and that he would pay it later. They eventually started arguing and I tried to intervene only to have the second guy insult me, which is where I drew the line. I'm used to being insulted by now, so it doesn't bother me at all, but that doesn't mean I let people get away with it easily, which is where the malicious compliance comes in. I calmly asked, "Sir, are you certain you want me to follow company guidelines here?" To which, of course, he answered yes. So I proceeded to make the fine, and then when I was done, said, "Sir, according to government and company guidelines, using your reduction card for a third person other than yourself voids your right to have said card, and hereby I will have to confiscate it." Now, this card is more than just reduction for public transport, but more or less any government-funded business. Now, he completely started losing it, and a coworker already heard that I had a difficult customer and came to assist me. I told the guy that he had to calm down and let me do my job, because otherwise company policy instructed me to call railway security on him. I continued checking the other passengers, and then about 40 minutes later at the final station, the two guys came to me and the second guy apologized for his behavior, which I must say caught me completely off guard. So I returned to my helpful self, canceled the fine, we can do that within an hour of making it, sold them slightly more expensive tickets, and gave him his card back. I really didn't feel like doing the paperwork for it anyway. So, in the end, me being maliciously compliant made him rethink his actions, and hopefully turned him into a better person. Although they did get belligerent and they did name call, I feel like part of this is just a little bit of being misinformed. Maybe I'm wrong, but maybe this guy had the impression that getting the fine was something they could put off and not have to pay and would save their friend some money altogether, or weren't aware of how much more expensive it would have been. Either way, it's nice to see that A, they both apologized, and B, OP wasn't vindictive and cut them some slack. Our next story is by L3N777, The Law is the Law. I once hosted an event in a bar. It was a kind of celebration for police trainees, new recruits, that kind of thing. Anyway, as I was busy slaving away, pouring drinks, etc., this one woman who was absolutely full of herself was watching me pour measures for another customer. making comments about the amount of ice in drinks, how I was using the wrong glass, I wasn't, and other obnoxious comments about how she was waiting to be served and she was here first. She wasn't. I was pouring some spirits, and for those who don't know, they come in standard sizes of 25 milliliters for singles, 50 milliliters for doubles, etc. I reached the end of the bottle as I was pouring the whiskey, and there was a tiny drop left, so I just poured those few extra milliliters into the glass, which you shouldn't really do, but who cares, right? Anyway, she gets up in my face about how it's technically illegal to pour extra measures, and that the law is the law, and I should follow the law to the letter. I tried to brush it off and ignore her and carried on serving other customers, but there she was commenting on pretty much everything I was doing, and as everyone who has worked in customer service, you know how annoying it is to have everything scrutinized and commented on as though you're nothing but a useless piece of crap. It comes to her turn and she asks for an alcoholic beverage. So using my limited powers, I ask her for her ID. She goes bright red in the face and stutters something about being old enough to be in the police. I tell her, sorry, if you don't have ID, I can't legally serve you. The law is the law after all. Lo and behold, she didn't have ID and had to settle for lemonade. Don't you just love when those people who think they're the boss of everything and are all on their high horse, inserting themselves into everything, giving their overly bloated opinion on everything, go and end up having something bad happen to them? You feel like karma's just really in action in those moments. And our final story of the day is by Tikno. Sorry, no unemployment for you, but back in the early 90s, I was working for a company that provided staffing for US government agencies. I was a system administrator at a large Department of Transportation facility. One day, I walked in, was told to see my supervisor, who very apologetically told me that Uncle Sam no longer wanted me working there. And, well, I was fired. I was told to go to the contracting company's office on the other side of town, which I had never been to save the day I was hired. Shocked, I drove up there. I was like 24 and had never been fired before. In retrospect, I know what happened. The project I was working on was failing, not because of anything I did or didn't do. The concept itself was flawed. There were 3 people who worked on the project. 2 were federal FTEs, plus me, the contractor. Anyone who has had experience with this knows the contractors are the first to go. So I'm sitting with the manager of the local branch, who has an email from the government employee in charge of the doomed project, listing a parade of horribles that I had done. Some of the minor ones were true, I had been late a few times, but the major ones were just fabrications. They claimed that there was a problem with the networking and that a contractor had to be engaged to fix the problem. Is that true? Well, yes, I am that contractor. I diagnosed the problem and then I fixed the problem. That's my job. Or at least it was until a couple hours ago. The manager realizes pretty quickly what's going on. Not that it gets me my job back. As we go through the separation procedures, he tells me that per company policy, he's required to document that I am not eligible for unemployment compensation. I just nodded because I didn't know much about these things. He says I'm getting a 2-week notice and that for the next 2 weeks, I am to show up to his office. He offered the use of office equipment to print resumes, apply for other jobs, and the like. So after a couple of days, he says he set up an interview for me at another project at the same facility. Sure, I went down there, sat with the project manager. Interview lasted less than 5 minutes. So we're a COBOL shop here. What's your experience with COBOL? I say none whatsoever. So we both realized it was a bad fit. I went back to the office, confused as heck. The site manager knew I didn't have COBOL experience. Why did he send me there? I found out a few weeks later. I had applied for unemployment compensation anyway, upon the urging of friends who said that policy sounded really sketchy. I had an interview at the unemployment office, and they looked over the paperwork, noticed the form that said ineligible, and the lady explained that I could contest that. I said sure. She asks me if I've been applying for work. I said yes. She asked if I've had any interviews. I told her about the one I had. Her eyes widened. She smiled. If they interviewed you for another position, that means you were not terminated for cause. You were let go because of lack of work. That's a layoff. She then marks on the paper that I am eligible for unemployment compensation. I ask if I still need to contest their finding. They say no, they can contest my determination, but given that they actively tried to keep you employed after these events, it's not gonna fly. He did you a big favor by sending you on that interview. That site manager is the real MVP. Silently sitting in the wings, pulling the strings, making sure all these people don't fall on hard times. Especially a young guy that never even experienced being fired before. That's really some good looking out. But with that being said, that's all the time we have for today. So if you have a favorite story of the day, let me know which story and why in the comments down below. But besides that, if you enjoyed the video, please consider giving it a like, and if you haven't, subscribe and turn notifications on so you'll never miss an upcoming video. No matter what you do, whether it's just viewing the video, liking, subscribing, turning notifications on, I appreciate the heck out of it. Every little thing that you do helps the channel grow that much more, and I can't thank you enough for it. So, until next time, I hope you all have a wonderful day, and I'll be right here next time on the Storytime channel.